And it begins the 10-minute war that never takes just 10 minutes with our good friend, the lone, reasonable Ohio State fan with a pretty darn good YouTube channel in his own right. Our good friend, Mark Rogers. Good to have you back, brother. How are you?
Appreciate it, Steve. A couple guys like us that get together like to talk college football. I guess 10-minute was just a name in and of itself. That
it's about the branding, not about the truth in advertising. Speaking of which, you know what's not about branding or truth in advertising right now? The Big Ten. Hey, the Big 12 during the realignment, musical chairs we played 10 years ago called and says, wow, you guys really suck at this whole messaging thing. And so I keep seeing people make comparisons between how well the Pac-12s handle it. I got to call BS on that, Mark. First of all, their fans don't care. Secondly, college football fans don't care about them. Thirdly, they're in a part of the country that, let's just face it and just acknowledge it. All right, we're in an election year. Let's not lie to each other. They're in a part of the country that politically, by and large, is totally fine locking down for EVs until the magical vaccine occurs. All right, so there is no pressure on them whatsoever. And this press conference they gave, where they gave specifics, they gave one specific, and it was they didn't trust that the testing would be readily available and affordable. And since they belong largely to a part of the country looking for an excuse to hide, their fans were actually relieved that they don't have to be pressured to watch college football. So let's move them aside, and now there's the rest of the country. Here in the Big Ten, I think I've never seen anything like what's going on with our league. I mean, the story that's going today, Sean Wade's dad flying from Florida to Illinois to confront the Big Ten headquarters about why his son's not playing. That's what you want. You want a future number one pick on your most, and I hate to admit it, but it's true, most visible program showing up uninvited, trying to figure out why his kid can't play football. We've now had letters from multiple schools of parents going to the Big Ten. You had the athletic director at Penn State yesterday, Sandy Barber, saying she wasn't aware that any vote was ever taken about whether or not to cancel the season, any kind of formal vote. This thing is a fuster-cluck of epic proportions. And I think right now what you're watching is the league is just in a bunker, hunkered down, hoping to run out the clock, hoping these other three leagues fail and can't go forward so that they escape accountability. What are your thoughts?
Well, I think that over the past several weeks, both of us have outlined the reasoning, or what we believe to be the reasoning, of the Big Ten shutting down the 2020 season, because it hasn't been completely explained to us, because both of us, Steve, you and I have both delivered a counterpoint to every supposed point that was made for canceling football. Really, when it comes right down to it, the only one on the surface, the only consideration given that I can buy to a certain extent would be the long-term impact, the long-term medical impact on the players, except we're going to turn around and put those same players on the field in December
to
get ready for a January football season. What great studies are going to come out between now and then to determine, oh, yes, we've got a good handle on the long-term impact to these student athletes. It just doesn't exist, and it won't exist during that short duration of time. So that was the only thing that caused me to pause for a minute and say, yeah, there is little known about the long-term impacts and to put those players out there. But every other point that has been made, Steve, I know that on your channel and mine, we have denounced each one of them very effectively because they just don't exist in a rational form.
And with the long-term ramifications, of course, we don't know what the long-term ramifications are with a virus that we didn't even really know about until 6 or 7 months ago. So I know of only one way to know the long-term ramifications of something, and that is to monitoring it. Stick with me now, okay? That's to monitor it long-term. I don't know any other way. So then we just don't play college football for 10, 20 years while we sit out here and monitor the long-term ramifications of that. It's a fallacy, that argument. The myocarditis argument, here's why I don't buy that. First of all, you've had a cardiologist with thousands of followers on Twitter at Michigan, maybe the most decorated med school in the entire conference. And then you had a cardiologist at Mayo, also in the Big Ten footprint in Minnesota, have both come out and called BS on that. And here's the other thing with the myocarditis thing. If it was that, they would have told us that from the very beginning. We both know our league loves to claim the fake moral high ground perpetually. If they had this evidence, if they had some kind of certifiable medical evidence, we would have seen it, I believe, by now, because they're getting drilled every which way but Sunday at the moment. So if they had some smoking gun somewhere, they would have showed it to us. So I don't buy the myocarditis thing. The testing example or testing excuse that the Pac-12 utilized, well, they utilized that excuse before the NBA Players Association announced that it actually subsidized a saliva-based test that's now FDA approved from Yale University. Oh, by the way, one of our own universities, the University of Illinois, has just successfully completed a rapid-fire coronavirus test at the exact same time. So all of the various rationales we're being given, they just don't pass the smell test. If they had something objective, they would have shared it by now, which means they simply used subjective reasoning. They didn't like the optics of it. They didn't want to encounter the liability. It's politics. It's these are the only two leagues that have had players posture towards publicly organizing, and they're the only two leagues still in the Power Five that are canceled. Who knows which of those subjective reasons it is? We put 14 ivory tower elites in a room. It's probably a different subjective reason for the whole batch of them at the same time, right? But at the very least, we know it's subjective, and that's why it's only angering players, their families, coaches, and their own fans more. Who knows whether there'll be enough pressure in the next week or two to get them to retract this decision? I don't think the odds are high, but I don't think they're zero by any means either. But at the very least, Mark, there is a long-term chasm of credibility here between the Big Ten and its players, families, coaches, and fans that I don't see getting reconciled anytime soon.
I didn't think that they necessarily anticipated this, or they couldn't have anticipated the groundswell of support to play football. Of course, that they knew that the fans would be mad and, the people out there that don't necessarily have a voice. But once you get the players and their families involved to the measure that they have been, it is a PR nightmare right now for the Big Ten, because there's really nothing that can play out here except for the ACC, the SEC, and the Big 12 failing to complete a season that is going to be their best outcome. But other than that, even if those kids get on the field and are able to play some semblance of a season, it's just not going to be a good look for the Big Ten in regards to the decision-making process.
What do you think? I said a minute ago, I don't think the odds are zero. I don't think they're high. So I'd probably put it 20%, which means 80% won't happen. But they do have an out to save face. They can say, hey, we didn't know about this FDA-approved saliva test. And now we've got something similar at the University of Illinois here in our own footprint as well. The NBA has subsidized this test, so it's $10 a pop to administer it, I think is what it is. So in light of this new information, we're going to well, the camps aren't closed. That's the irony too, by the way. If they really had all these myocarditis cases, then only from limited workouts and walkthroughs, why did they allow the limited walkthroughs and workouts to continue then? Why didn't they shut down them all? Michigan has practiced, Harbaugh, dude, they've practiced every damn day. Okay, they have practiced every day at Michigan since this announcement. So why didn't they shut down all of these workouts then if even those limited ones were exposing teams to myocarditis? That's the other reason I don't buy it. But what do you think the odds are that there's going to be enough pressure mounted on them that they could come out in the next week or two and say, tell you what, all right, we're going to go ahead, go to camps, we're going to go to contact, and then we're going to see how that goes for a couple of weeks. We're moving the season back to the end of September where the SEC is at, and then we'll go on their timetable and see where things are at, especially with the students on campus. What do you think?
Steve, the other portion of this that I would love to have seen some follow-up on, because I just don't think it really exists, is once these student athletes started to hit campus the first week of June, we started to hear the reports come in of the positive tests. We would hear from LSU and Clemson and on down the line.
Oh, LSU and Clemson had 54 players test positive in June between the two of them. 54.
Yeah, but we've never heard a follow-up.
I know.
Of
how many went to the hospital, how many died, how many were intubated, yes. Right? And there's never any follow-up to that. Yeah.
And all the stories on the major networks where we would see the stories with the heartstrings playing and, the violins in the background in regards to, this is just one of those, 6-minute little package documentaries that we would see on our various favorite sports platforms, where we would see the follow-up from a journalistic standpoint to tell the story of, day 1 looked like this, and day 7 looked like this, and day 14, and, they were at the brink of death, and then they came. If there would have been one player with a good story to tell, you would have thought it would have been told at this point. But I don't think it exists. So in light of that, do you see the pressure mounting on the Big Ten that would cause them to say, hey, we got to get out of this poop storm? Well, it looks awful. Nobody with any semblance of pride or arrogance, I'll choose the latter term, wants to go back on there and look bad. It just looks bad to go back and reverse field, even if that's the right thing to do. So I think it's a low percentage. I think less than 10% chance of the Big Ten, especially, of course, they're waiting for some semblance of support from the other leagues, not support directly, but supporting evidence coming out from the other leagues. And we get a smattering of it every so often. 9 players at Oklahoma the other day that is giving them some hope, I would think, that the other 3 are going to shut down. But I think it's less than 10% that the Big Ten retracts its original decision.
How about the fact we both agree on some level that the Big Ten is rooting for the failure of its own sport? How about that? What a terrible position to lock yourself into. And they've locked us as fans into this too, Mark. Let's be honest. I mean, our fans want to see college football this fall, no matter who it is. On the other hand, we have to understand that if these other leagues pull this off successfully, and I define success before you came on as not so much how many games they're able to play, but are they able to get to the end of the rainbow, a conference championship game? Even if several games have to be canceled, things of that nature, but there's enough integrity in the schedule that they can have a true conference champion. If they do that, they've had a successful season. And we have to understand that if these leagues pull this off and our league set this out, the damage this is going to do to us competitively and from a branding standpoint, it's almost like SMUing yourself, right? So they've put us as fans in a tough situation, which is in order to root to see college football this fall, we have to root for an outcome that probably is a detriment to our favorite teams here in the Big Ten, which is another crappy position to be in. But let's talk about the spring for a minute. To me, I think spring football is directly tethered to what happens with the other conferences. If the Big Ten doesn't reverse course and the other leagues can have these successful seasons, then I do think you're going to see spring football in the Big Ten. I think the pressure to put something on this calendar year, because the negative recruiting and everything that our coaches are going to face is going to be excruciating. All right. If, however, these other leagues cannot pull off a successful season, then I don't think you'll see any spring football in the Big Ten. What do you think?
And we're also going to be at a place on the calendar at that point, not to get political about it, but there will be a certain election that will have already taken place at that point, regardless of the outcome.
Right. So it might be politically safe to look at the actual data again. Who knows? Rather than lying to ourselves. Exactly. Yeah.
But the feasibility of a spring football season, and I was thinking, about my own little set here. Maybe, spring football gets us all excited, right? I get maybe my Chicago Blitz and Memphis Showboats helmets out. And we can go back to the mid-'80s. But my goodness, I just don't think it's feasible. We addressed it to a certain extent in other weeks, but not because of the Justin Fields type example of the guy that's the automatic top 5 pick in the NFL draft, but the 250 to 60 players that are drafted each year, plus the 150-odd players, something in that range, that have legitimate hopes of being drafted. You're talking about 400 to 500 players that would be a national scale. You pair that down to the Big Ten and the Pac-12. Maybe it's 150 players that have legitimate draft hopes. What do they do? Look at the predicament you're putting them in. They have to decide, do they need more game tape or do they need to prepare for an NFL draft? Are we going to see players suit up and play 3 or 4 games, be satisfied with their performance and their 300-yard rushing days or whatever it is, and say, I got to prepare for that combine coming up. See ya. That's one consideration that could possibly happen. Of course, the whole smashing 2 football seasons into one calendar year, despite the efforts of a Jeff Brom in particular in reducing the games, reducing the practices, reducing the physical nature of the sport in regards to the amount of contact and collision within those practices. It's a noble effort, but it's still magnified more so than one football season, full football season in one calendar year. It's still way too much for these guys. And also, Steve, I find it interesting because I have posed viewers the question after many of them posed it to me first. How valid would a national championship be in the fall, first and foremost, between those three conferences? I thought back quickly to 2018. Think of 2018. We had a national championship that involved the ACC, the SEC, and the Big 12 and Notre Dame. The Pac-12 and the Big 10 were excluded. It's not a true playoff. By invitation, they were excluded from participating in 2018, and Ohio State had basically the same resume, besides better wins, than Oklahoma. So which is more legitimate or less legitimate? One in which you play a season between those three conferences, and the other two conferences decided not to play. They forfeited those games. Or was your national championship more legitimate in 2018 when you excluded those two conferences from playing in your national championship? Also consider this, Steve, for the college football nation where it's all about optics, I should say, and about perception. Since 2015, get this, the SEC and Clemson are 15-6 in the college football playoff. And where do you think those 6 losses came from? Against each other.
Yeah.
All of Clemson's losses were to the SEC, right, and all of the SEC losses were to Clemson. They are 9-0 collectively, Clemson and the SEC, against the rest of college football. Therefore, they can claim legitimacy for this national championship and say, hey, we win these things anyway.
I mean,
what's going to happen in the spring?
Is the Big Ten and Pac-12 won a playoff game since Ohio State won the very first college football playoff? I don't think the leagues have won a single game, have they?
No, they haven't. So, and what, you know, I'm not trying to tout the relevance of my own program here, but to the average college football fan, we're in a gold medal sport. You and I still value the bowl games. We still value the Big Ten championship. The average college football fan, it's all about the playoff. Yeah. And who do they think is a legitimate contender out of those two conferences? Ohio State, they think one is, and even some would question that. So you've eliminated one team in the eyes of many college football fans.
That is well said.
The Big Ten and the Pac-12 playing in the spring, and Ohio State clobbering the Big Ten and then clobbering a Rose Bowl participant in the Pac-12 is not going to impress anyone.
That's if they do, because I think you're going to see the Buckeyes put a JV team out there. I mean, Justin Fields and Sean Wade and those guys are not playing college football in February, March, and April, right? So, that's what Nick Saban called it yesterday. He brought up the point you just made about all the guys that will sit out. Any draft-eligible player is sitting out. He says it's going to look like JV football is what it's going to look like in the spring. Finally, do you agree with me that the odds of this occurring in the spring of the Big Ten are directly tied to what happens with the other conferences in the fall? That if the league can politically just sit the whole year out until next year, it's going to do that. But for that to happen, it needs these other leagues to fail. If these other leagues pull it off in the fall, Ryan Day, Jeff Brom, Scott Frost, Jim Harbaugh, James Franklin, and these guys are already losing their minds. If they sit there for 2 months and watch these other leagues play, the calls that they're going to get from recruits and everything else, if you thought they were howling last week, wait until we get to November and we're knee-deep into a college football season that we're sitting out on. So I think it really is tied to what happens in these other leagues, whether we play in the spring or not.
No, it makes total sense, Steve, but it's a can't-win situation because you have to play, because they just proved that they are able to play. Mm-hmm. And as we go along versus this pandemic, we should be gaining better results. So why wouldn't you play in the spring? But the no-win situation is, again, you get on the field and you're either just playing yourselves for a Big Ten championship because the Pac-12 isn't able to get themselves together. And if they've canceled sports through the calendar year of 2020, who knows if they're going to be able to put together a football season for the spring. And again, their relevancy on a national level is compromised. So everyone, while these games are being played in the spring, is going to be saying, why weren't you guys playing that legitimate season that we just completed when everybody's supposed to be playing college football so we could have seen a legit national championship run?
Mark Rogers, always good to see you, brother. Thanks for joining us, my friend, here in the 10-minute, much longer than 10-minute war. Take care, all right?
Appreciate it, Steve.
You bet.